I'm back. Hello, everybody. I'm John O'Loughlin. Welcome to McDuff Lives. And it's time for another Undo the Coup. This will be number 8 in our series of Undo the Coup. Got a lot of information and a lot of things to say this morning. So let's get started in about 30 seconds. Hello, everybody. Once again, I'm John O'Loughlin, and welcome to McDuff Lives. Well, Undo the Coup is a series that I've started about 2 months ago, and I am hoping that it catches on. It's the idea that the assassination of President John F. Kennedy on November 22nd, 1963 was the beginning of a coup d'etat that continues to this day. And that is why we need to undo it. If we could turn back the clock to the day before that and look at our prospects as a country, I think we'd be far more secure, feeling far better about ourselves as a nation than we ever have since that terrible day. I was alive then. Many of you were alive then. And I can tell you that as a child, I thought I was growing up in the greatest country in the world. And most people will still say this is the greatest country in the world. But when it comes to national security, how can you be great if the people that run the country are not responsive to the voters? And that's what happened. There's no doubt in my mind that Allen Dulles, his brother John Foster Dulles, and the people that he used in government were working for the corporations that were the clients of those same lawyers at Sullivan and Cromwell, and a broader coterie of financial interests that cover the whole world. For instance, they represented I.G. Farben. So without getting into all that, just understand that the bulk of my work for this past 7.5 or 8 years now has been to explore and to expose the fact that we are under the government of the coup d'etat and not the government of the Constitution. This Constitution, this copy was given to me by my sister Lisa, who worked at the archives and was custodian of the national documents. Can you imagine anything more substantially spiritually connecting my dad to the Constitution than that his daughter had custody of the Constitution itself? So we're talking about a man whose importance has been completely suppressed because of the things that he knew. Thomas F. O'Loughlin died of fast cancer on June 6th, 1971. On June 6th, 1972, General Leroy Manor, who was his boss until he died a year previously, wrote a letter to my mother and to my dad's mother. And here is the letter. I will read it to you. 6th of June, 1972. Dear Mrs. Coakley, that's my grandmother's name. The Joint Chiefs of Staff recently held a strategic planning seminar here in Washington. The participants included senior officers from major commands throughout the world, many of whom were personal friends of your son, Thomas F. O'Loughlin, Jr. Tom was instrumental in the conception and early development of this seminar, which included a vital aspect of our national security. since he was dedicated to the planning which enhanced U.S. defenses. I thought you might be interested in knowing that Tom's final professional endeavors were culminated by the outstanding success achieved during this seminar. Our appreciation of Tom's contribution and efforts were recognized in a small way by a memoriam which appeared in the agenda of this conference, a copy of which is enclosed. I thought you might like it as a memento. I take this opportunity to express to you my appreciation for the dedication and contribution which your son made to our country's security. Sincerely, Leroy J. Manor, Brigadier General, USAF, Deputy Director for Operations, Counterinsurgency and Special Activities, DOCSA in parentheses. At that time, General Manor was serving as the SACSA, the Special Assistant for Counterinsurgency and Special Activities, which is the office set up by President Kennedy in direct response to the failure of the Bay of Pigs in 1962, into which my dad was one of the very first men drafted to become staff on the SACSA staff. So in February of 1962, he was approached by a couple of people. I believe they were from the DIA, actually, which is a very interesting connection, and was offered a position there as a planner, a special operations planner on the staff of the SACSA. He went to Director Hoover, met with him, and obtained Director Hoover's blessing. And so he applied for the job, and he, of course, got it because he was the only person that was selected for the job. It was one of those exceptional hires that you did not have to have competitive applications. He was just already picked out. So right there is a good question. Why him? What was so special about my dad? Well, we don't really know yet. I've been digging and digging at this for really for about 15 or 16 years before I started really spending time on it in about 2017. Anyway, this is the crazy thing that I wish that I knew the answer, but here's General Manor. And we actually received a framed copy of that memoriam, and I have it right here. This is the memoriam in that special seminar that was referred to in the letter. In memoriam, the late Thomas F. O'Loughlin, Jr., 1920 to 1971, through his dedicated and talented efforts, played a most significant role in promoting a continuing development of professional expertise and stimulating interest in an essential field of activity related to strategic planning. We find it most fitting that on the occasion of this seminar, his name be specifically honored for his contribution. And that's dated April 21st, 1972. So it was on the anniversary of his death, June 6, 1972, that General Manor wrote the letter. General Manor's title here, he was the SACSA, and I don't know why they just didn't call him the SACSA, but they didn't. They call it, the letter is signed over this signature, Deputy Director for Operations, Counterinsurgency, and Special Activities. Okay, Deputy Director for Operations sounds like DDO, does it not? Which is the Director of Plans that Frank Wisner held in the 50s. The Deputy Director of Plans is the Deputy Director of Operations in the CIA is the successor of DDP. But we are led to believe that the Air Force also used the title DDO. Sounds like he's double-hatted to me. Double-hatted, a concept that I was told about early on by an FBI guy named Ray Batvinis, who wrote a very interesting book about the FBI. And I was able to talk to him on the phone. He said, "Oh, well, your dad was probably double-hatted." So what does that mean? Well, my dad was an FBI guy. So he was like the liaison from Saxa back to Hoover. He was the guy in between, would have been General Manner, but going back to the beginning, let's go back to General Krulak. And you can study my 5 or 6 videos on Saxa, and General Krulak really stands out as the Kennedy guy, because the idea was to take special ops away from the CIA. And one of the immediate effects of the assassination of President Kennedy was to allow the CIA to come back into Saxa and run the whole show. In fact, in 1967, President Nixon signed an executive order basically saying that Saxa was now to work for the CIA. Well, that was not Kennedy's plan. That's the opposite of Kennedy's plan. And you see that? So my dad's there trying to fulfill Kennedy's desire to take CIA operations that were the bigger operations, like the Bay of Pigs, away from them, because he didn't trust them to do it. So, and you can read Fletcher Prouty on this, but they put that office in the Pentagon directly under the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Okay. Now, when I say directly under the Joint Chiefs of Staff, I mean it literally. If you go to the Pentagon and look at the river entrance, the formal ceremonial entrance that faces the mall across the river, across the Potomac River, you'll see that there's 3 levels to the Pentagon, the offices. And the top one is the Secretary of Defense, right there at the river entrance. The one right below it is the Joint Chiefs of Staff. And the one right below that was Saxa, literally. So you can see how the vertical chain of command is so obvious. So what we encountered with the Kennedy assassination is a takeover of special operations by the CIA, which was exactly what President Kennedy did not want to happen. And my dad's sitting there in the position of, wow, what are we going to do now? What do we do? Well, we've explored that extensively in the show, and you can go back and look at all of my McDuff videos, which are usually about 45 minutes or an hour long, that I've posted over the past 6 years. Of course, the first channel, McDuff, Kennedy's Man to Smash the CIA, was itself smashed by YouTube back in 2019. And they won't give it back to me. They will not. I've gone through all the appeals, and they just won't give it back to me. So that's 1,000 videos that are lost. But, well, I've filled in the gap with a couple thousand more. So never fear. McDuff is going to continue the fight to undo the coup. Undo the coup. It was a coup d'etat. Look, any other country where you see a coup d'etat, you say, oh, well, that's just one of those countries that has coups d'etat. But the United States of America is not supposed to have coups d'etat. We're supposed to have elections. And look how they've messed with the elections with these digital computer things that are so easily corrupted. Our elections are no longer credible to the American people, I would submit. Why? Because of the Kennedy assassination. And of course, all the other skullduggery that has been practiced since then. So, one of the great books, and I emphasize great books on this subject, is The Crimes of Patriots by Jonathan Whitney. A True Tale of Dope, Dirty Money, and the CIA. And this is one of the first books I read in my entire, I must have done 15 shows on it. They're all gone, but I want you still to bear in mind that this is a key book. And one of the amazing things is when you get to page 190 and we learn about the involvement of General Leroy J. Manor. Just to set the scene, Nugan Bank was an Australian bank with a branch in Chiang Mai, Thailand, and it was a CIA money laundering, drug trafficking, bank that pretended to be a good investment. So it took investments from hundreds of Americans serving overseas for the reason that maybe it got a little better interest or was more easily converted from Australian dollars to US dollars. So there was a number of reasons, and there was the dangling of shares that would someday be worth a lot of money. So anyway, a lot of Americans innocently invested their money in this bank. And one day, Frank Nugan, the guy that started the bank, was found dead in his Mercedes-Benz limousine on a road in Australia with a shotgun pointed to his head or something like that, dead, and claimed to be a suicide. So this book is about the investigation of that suicide, and let's get into the part I wanted to read today. Page 190, The Crime of Patriots by Jonathan Whitney. One fellow at Nugan Manila office was certainly known to the Marcoses. He was 3-star General Leroy J. Manor. Now, let's point out, okay, on this letter in 1972, he's a 1-star. How did he get to be a 1-star and then all of a sudden he's a 3-star within 2 years? Isn't that pretty interesting? He was 3-star General Leroy J. Manor, who had just spent 7 months across a table from Marcos, negotiating a new 10-year lease on the U.S. bases he had commanded at Clark and Subic Bay. In October 1979, at a gathering of Nugan executives and sales staff in Sydney that was tape recorded, General Manor gave the following account of how he came to join the bank. Back in 1977, he said, I was still on active duty sitting in my office in Hawaii when my good friend Buddy Yates, that's Admiral Buddy Yates, stopped in to have a visit with me. I've always had a very high regard for Buddy. I saw him operate in the military, and if you think he's a goer now, you should have seen him then. Very highly respected in the military, obviously. He told me about the firm he was with, Nugan, which was the first time I'd ever heard of Nugan, and he said that he thought there would be a place for me in Nugan upon my retirement. I said, Buddy, I don't know anything about banking. I've dedicated my whole life to the military. He said, you can learn, can't you? So this was a great opportunity, Manor told the group. But on his retirement from active duty in July 1978, there was another job that had to be done that I felt I ought to accept, and that was the negotiations in the Philippines. I was asked by my government to head the negotiations for the bases. This delayed my accepting the offer. However, it wasn't all lost because during my stay in Manila, working on the negotiations, I made many more contacts, and I think this is probably of special importance. He went on to say that the lease agreement he had negotiated provided $500 million in aid. In addition to the $250 million in military hardware, the very thing the impoverished Filipino people needed, There would be $250 million in, quote, security assistance funds, unquote, which could, quote, allow the Philippine government to divert some of the funds from military support to some projects that will probably have a bearing, very definitely will have a bearing on the economy of the Philippines, unquote. He mentioned power plants or port facility. Then he noted with pride that some little part of the $500 million in U.S. aid might indirectly reach the Philippine economy. Well, wouldn't that be a surprise? Where it could benefit people and companies. Maybe it would even help Nugan Hand. And he went on to ask, now, how can I contribute? Under the tutorship of Buddy Yates, Wilf Gregory, and I'm sure many others, I hope that I will learn to be productive. I feel humble standing before you today because I've been tremendously impressed with the knowledge, the professionalism, and the mission orientation that I see here in this organization. As the newest member of your firm, it's a tremendous opportunity for me to be here. Manor spoke of how much he and his wife liked living in the Philippines and how valuable his contacts were there, all indicating that he intended to serve Nugan Hand from Manila. But Gregory insists that Manor was in Manila only temporarily and being groomed for a Nugan Hand management post in the U.S. Gregory also says Manor kept dual offices for a few months, both at Nugan Hand and at the U.S. Embassy, working for a bank and working for the U.S. Manor denies that, and he says he didn't join Nugan Hand until he thought his government work was concluded. He thought. Of all the people in Nugan Hand, Manor is the hardest to classify. If you had to be either a crook or a fool, it's hard to imagine what Manor was doing there. His case cries out for some other explanation. His military career was more than merely distinguished. He was a fighter pilot hero of two wars, World War II and Vietnam. He spanned the eras of pistons and jets. The list of medals he's won are as listed on his official biography, coming from Korea, Vietnam, and the Philippines, as well as the U.S., is so long that if he wore them all, he probably couldn't stand upright. His best-known mission, however, and guess what? This is another tie to my dad. His best-known mission, however, while honorable, was an embarrassing failure. Having been promoted to general and made commander of the U.S. Air Force Special Operations Force in February 1970, he spent August to November of that year organizing and leading a daring commando raid to capture U.S. prisoners of war behind enemy lines in North Vietnam. At great risk, Manor and the task force reached the Sante prisoner of war camp, but they found nobody home. The raiders all managed to return safely, conceding that the camp had been empty for 3 or 4 weeks to 3 months. Exactly what went wrong has never been established. Manor was quoted in the New York Times as calling the raid, quote, a complete success with the exception that no prisoners were rescued, unquote. He went on to become commander of the Philippine air bases and eventually chief of staff of the entire Pacific Command. In that role, he coordinated Air Force, Navy, Army, and Marine Corps operations. This was his last job before his 1978 retirement and his call back to negotiate the Philippine-based leases and perform other work the Air Force says is so secret it can't be talked about. That was as of the publication of this book back in 1987. I imagine it's still secret. All this stuff is still secret. In December 1979, records show an application was filed with the Philippine government to change Manor's status from that of a foreign government official to that of an executive of a foreign multinational with a salary of no less than $12,000 a year. A month later, a red Ferrari arrived for him from Hong Kong and was exempted from customs duties. Isn't that sweet? You get 2 more stars on your shoulder and a red Ferrari just for working for Nugan Hand. That same month, General Manor pitched Nugan Hand investments during a speech at the Officers Club at Hickam Air Force Base. According to Colonel H. Kirby Smith, Chief Judge of the U.S. Air Force 7th Judiciary Circuit at Clark Air Force Base. On January 22nd, 1980, 5 days before Frank Nugent was shot, Colonel Smith says, General Manner instructed him how to deposit money in Nugent's hand by wire, which he did $20,000 2 days later. General Manner says he wasn't soliciting, I was merely answering questions, quote unquote. The next month, Manner presented Smith with Nugent Hand certificate of deposit number 11531, promising 15.125% interest, without telling Smith of Nugent's death, which says he didn't learn of which he says he didn't learn of until the bank collapsed in April. From January to April, he didn't know about it. And here he is, the branch manager in the Philippines. According to his claim, this was, quote, somewhat of a shock. $20,000 is a lot to a military man and his wife, unquote. Colonel Jimmy Maturo, who has since retired, was stationed in Hawaii when he deposited $27,000 after hearing about the bank from his old boss, General Manner. Colonel Maturo deposited the last $16,000 on March 12, 1980, long after Nugent Hand insiders had rifled the files and were preparing for its demise. There are plenty of others around town, Colonel Maturo tells a reporter. If you can put it to these rats, more power to you. The reporter brings up Manner's name, and Colonel Maturo will say only, quote, I know Manner, unquote. Then, repeating himself for emphasis, he asserts, if you can put it on those bastards, more power to you, unquote. 2 months after Colonel Maturo unknowingly bid permanent goodbye to his last deposit, and a month after Nugent Hand entered formal liquidation proceedings, General Manner was assigned by the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff to head the Pentagon's investigation into the failed attempt to rescue 50 Americans, mostly diplomats, being held in Iran. Yeah, General Manner investigated and filed the report on Operation Eagle Claw. The attempt had been aborted April 26, 1980, after 3 of 8 helicopters failed mechanically en route to the staging area in Iran. 3 of 8 failed mechanically. A 4th helicopter and an Air Force C-130 cargo plane crashed into each other at the staging area. Ironically, General Manner was chosen to head the inquiry, apparently because of his own previous experience leading a failed rescue mission. The investigation completed, General Manner was chosen to be executive director of the Retired Officers Association, headquarters in Alexandria, Virginia. His biography, as issued by that organization, omits reference to his banking career. It doesn't even mention Nugent Hand. The general then undertook to start a scholarship fund for the 17 children of the 8 American servicemen killed in the Iranian raid. And the asterisk footnote, the fund, the Arthur D. Bull Simons Scholarship Fund, is under management of Communities Foundation of Texas, Inc., Dallas, Texas. Okay, and now, of course, naming it after Bull Simons, you have to realize that Bull Simons is one of the most important people in my biography of my dad. Somebody that clearly knew my dad and was inherent in special operations going back to Laos in the 1950s. Pardon me a moment. Now, all of this happened back in the late 70s and 80s. And is it important to us now? Yeah, it is. It's important to us now because these people are in the position, the successors to the people that were in similar positions when the coup happened. In fact, a couple other names should be mentioned here. I want to go to the end of the book where Whitney, the author, gave space to the so-called true patriots, quote unquote. And Admiral Buddy Yates wrote a it's a 3 or 4 page denial of the entire book. Earl P. Yates, Rear Admiral, U.S. Navy, retired, the true patriots. In his otherwise admirable fight against the scourge of drugs, fraud, illegal arms sales, and abuse of government power, Mr. Whitney has maliciously maligned and assassinated the character of some truly great American heroes, and in so doing has besmirched the reputations of the military and intelligence services of this nation. My purpose here is to defend the honor of those men and the services they represent. The general comments herein concern only those people for whom I had some measure of responsibility for their involvement in Nugan Hand, and for whom I can speak with great confidence. Their names are General Edwin Black. General Edwin F. Black, a very important figure, General Black was actually the last SACSA. I just recently learned that after General Manor, the SACSA office continued, and it was General Black himself who headed the office until it just kind of disappeared. It kind of got like slipped off the table. There's no more SACSA after about 1975. Anyway, General Edwin Black, General Earl Koch, C-O-C-K-E, General Leroy Manor, Mr. Dale Holmgren, Dr. Guy Parker, Mr. Donald Beasley, Mr. William Colby. Hello, William Colby. It was William Colby's business card that was found in the pocket of the dead Frank Nugan in his limousine back in 1980. So Colby, and a couple I don't know, Walter McDonald, Robert Jansen, and George Ferris. These people are called the true patriots by Admiral Buddy Yates, who's writing this apologia. And skipping through some of it, for the above reasons, they unanimously regret any distress that their association, however innocent, might have contributed to others. I add to those regrets my own remorse for having induced the true patriots to join Nugan Hand. I take full responsibility for that. They associated with Nugan Hand largely because of their trust in my assurances that I had gone to extraordinary lengths to determine the integrity of that organization and found no evidence whatsoever of a shortfall. In other words, he just listened to Frank Nugan and believed everything he said and said, okay, you seem credible to me. I'm going to go out there and be a shill for you and get people's money to invest in this bank so you can have some capital through which you can do your money laundering, your drug sales, and all your other crap. So Edwin F. Black was a principal of the Nugan Hand Bank. And then he, in 1971 or 2, becomes the SACSA after my dad is dead. My dad dies during Leroy Manor. Leroy Manor, obviously double-hatted, obviously working for the CIA, as well as, drawing his Air Force general's salary, somehow gets bumped up to a lieutenant general before he retires. That was sweet. But as far as the world knows, he's a great hero, a great fighter pilot, a military icon. We've also learned recently that it was Leroy Manor who was running Operation Popeye in Vietnam And there's another real interesting conundrum, is that the Sante raid occurred in 1970 at the same time that Leroy Manor was running Operation Popeye, which was intended to cause floods and destroy the roads of North Vietnam so that they would have trouble getting around. But to what extent did Operation Popeye impact the Sante raid, which my dad, I believe, and I think I can prove it, was the chief planner for? Because we do know that it was run out of SACSA, and my dad was the special operations planner at SACSA. So the theory of, quick cancer and getting rid of my dad has been also explored pretty thoroughly, as much as I can, on my show. It does appear that the military, the intelligence organizations, etc., working with programs like MK Ultra and others, have developed ways to kill people, and you can see Colby admitting it at the House Select Committee on Assassinations. They had the heart attack gun and they had a cancer weapon. So my dad, having been on JFK's team when he was brought in, knew too much and was probably still a real pain in the ass to people like General Manor, who was trying to run special operations that included things like drug running. Which is why my dad, and I believe DIA Chief General Joseph F. Carroll, were involved in setting up the TDY mission, documented in Doug Valentine's book, TDY, that shows that a mission was run out of the Pentagon to catch the CIA doing a big drug deal with Vang Pao in Laos. The boss of the Joint Chiefs at the time was Thomas H. Moorer. We know that Thomas H. Moorer suspected Henry Kissinger of committing treason. We know that from the Moorer-Radford affair. So all of these secret operations and many, many others we won't talk about today, but will occasionally make reference to, over the period from 1962 or 3 until now, are all being run by a shadow government. A shadow government that is basically a fascist government. So the American people, relying on this beautiful document, the Constitution, still think that we have the rule of law in this country. But it's shaking. It's shaking to the core. As a matter of fact, on the Democratic side, a book was written back in 2014 or so called National Insecurity. Can't remember the author's name, but the subject of the book was how insecure people find themselves under the Obama administration and others, because all of these crazy things keep happening and we can't explain them. So it's not just people like me who feel that our national security is completely compromised by this coup. Everybody that takes a hard look at it feels uncomfortable, feels like our national security is tenuous. And it depends upon us continuing to believe in this fantasy that Lee Harvey Oswald, with his Mannlicher Carcano crappy rifle and him being a lousy shot was able to deliver 3 shots within, 3 seconds or so at President Kennedy, killing him and wounding Governor Connolly, and the magic bullet and all of that stuff we've talked about in previous editions of Undo the Coup. So there's 2 potential murders here that I'm focused on: the assassination of President Kennedy and the untimely death by quick cancer. I believe it was diagnosed approximately November of 1970, right at the same time that the Sante raid was happening, right after they dropped me off at college for my first year of college at William & Mary. So as you know, I mean, my grandfather, my dad's father, suspected that it was weaponized cancer because it was metastasized. And the metastasized cancer is very suspicious in terms of why didn't it just stay in the first organ? Why does it move along? What gives it the power to metastasize into different organs? It's a big, important question we have today because of metastasis happening following the COVID shots. All of which is to say, the investigation into the death of President Kennedy was cut short by the same people that ran the coup. It's my opinion at this time, I could be wrong, but it's my opinion that the actual decision to shoot Kennedy was made initially by Sam Giancana because of the duplicity of the Kennedy family when he supported the election of John F. Kennedy against the overwhelming favorite of the deep state, that was Richard Nixon, in the 1960 election. And because the mafia had made a substantial investment in electing Kennedy, they expected that Kennedy would go along with the invasion of Cuba to get back all of those wonderful casinos and drug trafficking routes and everything else that comes along with control of that very important island. And John F. Kennedy stood up to them and would not allow the CIA to drag him into what potentially was a war with Russia over the missiles. To many of these officers, that was unforgivable. These officers believe that they are patriots. But patriots don't murder the president. Patriots do not contrive a way in which someone that they can control, i.e. Lyndon Johnson, can assume the presidency as a result of an assassination of which Lyndon Johnson is a big part of the cover-up, if not the planning itself. Because we are not one of those countries that submits to coups now and then, at least not knowingly. And we consider ourselves to be citizens of this country that benefit from the Constitution and the individual rights. And it is the violation over and over and over again of our individual rights, of our persons, of our national honor, and especially of our national economy, to fulfill the purposes of the people behind the coup d'etat of 1963 that continues to this day. So my message, McDuff's message, is undo the coup. Dump open the file cabinets. Stop covering it up and give the government back to we the people. Stop with all the propaganda, stop with all the lying, stop with all the obfuscation, and stop putting puppets in office. You know, President Trump could do a lot. He could even cause what I've asked for to actually happen. I'm sure he knows more than he's telling us. It is the MAGA people. It is the people who put President Trump in office who can carry the ball here. It has to be a lot of us. It has to be a big movement to undo the coup. But until we do, what is national security except for us sitting in our homes watching Netflix while our country's military, economy, health, everything is controlled by a secret government that we did not elect? We don't even know who they are, and is continuing to rob us blind. So, McDuff's message is undo the coup. Thanks for being with me. I'll see you guys tomorrow right here at McDuff Lives.